It's only 15 pages a day for the last 3 weeks. Just, you know, each night, put yourself to sleep reading that thing.
We're live.
I'd like to call to order. And to call to order the August 19th Planning Commission meeting. We can all stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, looks like everybody's here. I'd do a little roll call. Jennifer Davis and Commissioner Morton
Here.
and Commissioner Dewar
Here.
and Mr. Packard
Here.
and Ms. Tuxford.
Yes.
Tuxford, thank you. And so we're all here in attendance. That brings us to guest business. Do we have anybody online?
No.
Thank you. Right. That'll take us to our first action item. That's to review the minutes. Everybody had the opportunity to take a look at those. Any amendments? All right, we have a motion to approve.
So moved?
Second. And a second. All right, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? So moved. That brings us to Manager Levitan and the comprehensive plan.
All right. Thank you, Commissioners. David Levitan, Senior Planner. So we are here tonight to review the public review and agency review draft of the comprehensive plan. After working on this for the last about a year, a little bit more, as far as starting with the community engagement last summer and then building into some of the technical and research analysis, policy development, working very closely with the Planning Commission. The public review draft was issued on July 26th, was sent out to all of the different agencies, to the email list of interested individuals that have provided comments in the past, shared on various social media channels and the city website, went out in some news releases. And we've had an overwhelming public response here tonight. So, but I think that actually says something about, you know, the amount of planning that we've done in the past and that, you know, we have been engaging the community throughout the process. So we're not seeing as drastic of changes maybe as some other communities that are needing to accommodate the projected growth. The city's done a very good job of making some of those changes, staying ahead of the curve. So I'm just going to provide a very brief overview tonight, and then we'll get in, allow, if we have anybody from the public show up online, they're welcome to provide any comments. For anybody that's watching a video of this later, you can also submit comments to me via the Comprehensive Plan Update website. Submit those via email or in writing. So we're happy to continue to accept those all the way through the public hearings. So just a little bit, we're going to keep this pretty high level. Yeah.
Much public comment?
We have not. No, we've gotten agency comments and we'll get into that a little bit more. But so far, yeah, for members of the public, and we've sent it out directly to, you know, a couple dozen individuals, the people that have come to open houses and all that. We actually haven't gotten any public comments at this point. So we're going to continue to do outreach. And I think as we get in and we do some of the public noticing for some of the proposed map amendments, then people will get a little bit more interested. We wanted to have this last work session before we sent out those notices to affected property owners. And I would imagine that we'll get maybe a little bit more interest when that happens. Kind of the reality of it sets in once you get that notice in the mail.
Great,
So we're just going to provide a very quick overview of the process to date. You know, give just a general summary of the policy document as well as the proposed map amendments, take any public testimony if anybody shows up, and then allow for the commission to provide their feedback, provide any direction, any amendments that they would like to see, and then talk about next steps a little bit. So just a little bit of a reminder, everyone here should be pretty familiar with this. We're in the middle of our state mandated periodic update, required to be adopted by December 31st, 2024. Moving forward, that will be required. What in the past has been 7 years, then 8 years. Actually now the city will just need to be required to do the periodic update every 10 years. The one exception is we are required to adopt a standalone climate change and resilience element by 2029, which we wanted to hold off on to see if there are any additional changes in state law that we'd like to incorporate into that. The comp plan needs to be consistent with the Growth Management Act, Puget Sound Regional Council's Vision 2050, which covers basically the central Puget Sound area. And then it's reviewed by the Department of Commerce. They distribute it out to a number of other state agencies, and we have gotten some comments from some of those. Then Puget Sound Regional Council, which we'll be chatting with tomorrow. Their initial feedback on the plan is that they thought that we did a great job. They wanted to have a phone call tomorrow to have a little bit more of a detailed conversation on that, but that was good initial feedback from PSRC. So just a little bit about the process. So starting last summer with our public engagement, did some community events into the fall, did surveys, did periodic check-ins with the Planning Commission and the City Council, not just during that phase 1, but really throughout the process. Moving into that phase 2, which is policy and plan development, do a lot of the background information, incorporate a lot of the recent state legislation that's required to be reflected in the plan. Some of the policy analysis and policy development, starting to develop the chapters of the plan, update those. Basically, there were 8 existing elements plus the introduction, and then continued to have check-ins with the Planning Commission and City Council through that process. As mentioned, on July 26th, we issued a draft of the complete policy document as well as potential map amendments. So we are in the process where we're continuing to accept public and agency comments, comments from the Planning Commission, comments from the City Council, basically before we release the public hearing draft. And so at this point, we are scheduled at the Planning Commission's second meeting in September. So that's September 18th meeting, tentatively scheduled for our public hearing with the Planning Commission, where they would then review the document and make a recommendation to City Council, and then hold a public hearing, a separate public hearing with the City Council to consider the Planning Commission's recommendation. Along with the local adoption process, then PSRC is required to certify the plan, and then we're required to file our notice of adoption with the Department of Commerce. So that's the general process involved. And I'm just going to keep this very brief because we've talked about this at pretty much every meeting, is really the growth targets for 2044 are driving this process. When you look back to 2020, which was the beginning of the planning horizon, basically the 2020 to 2044 period, the city required to show its capacity to accommodate about 9,600 residents, 3,200 jobs, and just under 5,000 housing units. We've made decent progress over the last few years towards all of those. So we're kind of doing well as far as, the incremental growth that we need to meet those targets. And so we're just responsible for basically from 2024 to 2044, we need to show the remaining capacity within our zoning framework to accommodate that growth. So just as far as some of the highlights on how the city must plan. So basically demonstrating consistency with Vision 2050's regional growth strategy, addressing recent changes to state law, including the Growth Management Act. And then there was a lot of recent state legislation that changed the GMA and really, were major focuses of this periodic update that included incorporating climate change adaptation, mitigation, and resilience language and policies. ensuring that we're compliant with the Growth Management Act as amended by House Bill 1220 in 2021, which requires the city to kind of more proactively and more prescriptively plan for housing needs at all income levels, addressing some of the other components of HB 1220 and other recent legislation, such as addressing racially disparate impacts in housing, trying to develop policy language to address that issue, as well as potential displacement of existing residents and businesses. City's obviously going to be pretty dependent on infill development. We don't have a whole lot of vacant land left. So ensuring that as the city grows, we're making sure that, businesses that have thrived or not thrived, businesses that have been here for a while, residents that have, basically an unsubsidized set of affordable housing, that we're making sure that we're looking out for those individuals and those business owners as well. And then basically just the concept of equity and sustainability are kind of sprinkled throughout the plan. So that's been a major focus of developing some of this policy language. I'm not going to get too much into this, but again, housing has been kind of the dominant issue probably over the last couple of years, especially at the state level, with some of the legislation that's come out of Olympia. So just a quick reminder, of those about 4,900 housing units, about half of those the city needs to plan for at 80% or below of area median income, and then about the other half at 100% or above of area median income. Area median income for a family of four as of 2024 in Snohomish County is about $150,000. That's a number that's risen quite rapidly over the last few years, and anybody that's in the housing market, even at that area median income, it's getting pretty difficult to find housing that meets the affordability quotient. So just making sure that we are planning for the needs of all current and future residents of Lake Stevens. Just a little bit about the comprehensive plan. So that's included as attachment 1 in tonight's packets. It includes an introduction, and that should read eight elements, so a total of 9 chapters. Issued on the 26th of July, sent out to agencies, tribes, public, posted on the city website, issued via social media, distributed via our project email list. Haven't received any public comments yet. We have received comments from the Department of Natural Resources, Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, Department of Transportation, and I believe another state agency, the Puget Sound Partnership. We are meeting with PSRC tomorrow and have not received official comments from Commerce yet, but a lot of times that's more towards the end of the process. The other attachment in tonight's packet is attachment 2, which is potential map amendments. These are kind of split between really a lot of the focus, especially on the ones that propose changes towards multifamily residential development, are basically to help us meet our housing growth targets at lower income levels. Basically anything at or below 80% of area median income, those housing needs need to be provided per state guidance within multifamily residential or accessory dwelling units. So looking for additional areas with the capacity to meet those needs. And then some of the employment needs, including some changes, some additional areas that are zoned commercial district, consolidation within the Lake Stevens Industrial Center into one zoning and land use designation to be able to implement the vision within that Lake Stevens Industrial Center analysis that was done in 2023. Basically, the remainder of kind of the commercial and industrial changes are really to bump up our employment capacity over the next 20 years to make sure that we have adequate capacity to meet our needs during that period. And then there are kind of some of the residential changes that are more kind of essentially cleanup, basically neighborhoods that are developed at, say, R6 or R812 standards already, but say have R4 zoning designation. So just providing a land use and zoning designation that's consistent with actual development in those areas. As I mentioned, we have not sent out the notice. Basically, any property owner that would be affected by a land use map amendment and or a zoning map amendment we would be sending out notices to them, and we would anticipate we'll start to hear a little bit more once people start getting those notices in the mail. And so we'll be doing that shortly, basically after this meeting. Wanted to get the last kind of round of feedback from the Planning Commission before we do that and make sure that there are several weeks of advance notice prior to that September 18th Planning Commission public hearing.
And if I may, is that adjacent property? Or is that is there the 300 feet radius?
Oh, the 300 feet? Is it for those zoning?
There actually is no requirement for major map amendments to follow that protocol that you're talking about. That's really specific to the land use development, but he wanted to go above and beyond that and provide notes to the affected property owners of the potential changes. So in this case, the 300-foot radius doesn't apply.
So it would be adjacent only.
It would just be
Affected.
just the affected. Just the properties that are affected.
So-
Not the adjacent. We've already gone above and beyond the noticing requirement, so.
Sure. But is your question,
Yeah.
would you argue what you're trying to say is the neighbor, the adjacent property is affected by that
Right.
land use change? Understood, but that's what you're getting at. How do you quantify or define affected? Because you're arguing if I'm next to the person who has a property change, then I could feel affected by that and would potentially want to know. Is that what?
Understood.
I want
putting words in
Commissioner
your mouth.
Packard
I
to
apologize.
speak for me from now on. Please make note.
I apologize.
No, that is exactly where I was going is, so we have neighborhoods that are being built next to neighborhoods. And technically, they would not be made aware because they are not adjacent.
And they will get notice if there is development.
Right,
they
after the fact. But
notice.
for this process, we are not.
Correct.
Interesting. Okay.
All right. So yeah, and we're happy to get into, obviously more discussion. This is the last slide. So yeah, if we have anybody show up, encourage the commission to allow for any public comment before going on to commission discussion. Provide feedback to staff. And then next steps would be to incorporate the public agency commission city council comments into a public hearing draft, issue the SEPA threshold determination. Kind of the bulk of that SEPA analysis will be on really the land use changes. A lot of the other changes are pretty minor and incremental, don't require a detailed level of environmental analysis. They're generally improving the environment with some of the policy language and the calling for more environmentally friendly practices. Those are things that are not likely to have an environmental impact. We basically just need to look primarily at some of the land use and zoning map amendments, issue the public notice, including for impacted property owners. So that's the notice that Russ was discussing. Basically, it's not required. It's not codified in the municipal code, but it's something that we like to do so that people aren't surprised after the fact. We like to give them notice in advance of the meetings. We are going to be providing a briefing the city council on September 3rd. And then the planning commission's public hearing is tentatively scheduled for the 18th of September. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions, and I can bring up the policy document. I'll stop sharing this presentation and I can just share my browser and pull up the plan or the map if you'd like to zoom in on any specific areas or any specific parts of the document.
I had a quick question about the comments that came from like DNR. You said Commerce hasn't commented yet, but the agency comments, was there anything that was of note? Sometimes I know they make sort of like small procedure comments, but is there anything that you think we should know about or?
The washed out ones were very limited, just basically pointing out where they thought that our plan, especially on things like active transportation, was doing a good job, that it was compliant. So they didn't identify any issues. DNR was, yeah, on just some specific policies related to natural resource management and some of the other items that they had some good, kind of just very minor tweaks that they would like to see that I think that we can incorporate into that public hearing draft. Fish and Wildlife was probably the most detailed and the most prescriptive and maybe going above and beyond the requirements of what we need to plan for under the Growth Management Act within a comprehensive plan. A lot of them seemed more applicable to policy language or program development, kind of very specific requests on verb choices and things along those lines. And they're very passionate about what they do, so it's not surprising. So we're going to continue to review those, and we provide responses to all the agencies. Thank you for your comments. This is where we're looking at doing. This is where we think maybe it's not appropriate within the comprehensive plan to make some of these proposed changes. But yeah, nothing that's really stood out as far as being like, what are you guys thinking? You completely missed this. We haven't gotten that yet, and I haven't heard that from PSRC yet, and that was the one that I was probably the most concerned about. So we'll see what they have to say tomorrow.
Okay, so on the map, I do have one more suggestion for
Yeah.
for a rezone. One of the goals is to have higher densities near the transportation center or near modes of transportation. So there's one neighborhood that's very close to the transportation center, just that neighborhood just north of Target, right behind Target. They're zoned R6. And those are older homes. And I would think that, when those homes reach the end of their life, or I would think be soon, that would be a prime candidate for redevelopment into a higher density and also be very close to the transportation center. That whole neighborhood that goes all the way from, I guess that's 4th all the way up to Vernon Road. Or not Vernon Road, Davies, yeah. That whole chunk. I could point it to you if you brought it up on the screen.
Well, that's not it.
A lot of those are rental places too.
So we will take a look at that, but that would also touch on one of the other competing priorities, which is retention of affordable homes, which a lot of those are, and a lot of those do have supportive functions. So
Okay.
there is going to be a balance as we
Okay.
look at that particular neighborhood.
Yeah, okay. So other than that, so that's the only idea I've got. I like everything you've got there. Like you said, you really don't have to change much to reach the goals. And as far as the notice that you're sending out, I mentioned this last time. For the people whose zone is changing, it's kind of like winning the lottery, because they all of a sudden can do something with their property that they wouldn't normally be able to do. And so I hope that in that notice they're given education as to what that really means. That they have a higher zone density.
Yeah, no, and I know that's been some feedback at our last meeting as well, making sure that we provide kind of easy to decipher and digest language and not just use a bunch of planner speak and, explain the situation that this isn't, requiring or mandating them to make any changes. It's basically what the purpose of it is, that it would allow for some additional permissible uses within these zones. But really it's, would be up to the private property owners as far as deciding in the future if these changes were made, how they would like to utilize and potentially redevelop their properties.
As I was going through this packet, and it's a dense packet at 300 plus pages. I can tell you, I really appreciate how we, over the last year, took reasonably sized bites at this thing. I think one of the questions I have, because I frankly can't remember back that far sometimes. And not having track changes on this document itself or legislative copy here. Is there anything materially different that's changed since, for example, we saw one of the sections, the transportation section or something like that. Has there been any last minute alterations or changes? I didn't think I saw any, but just want to verify. Because
Yeah,
again,
that-
at 300 pages, it's easy to.
Yeah, and that was especially with some of the housing and the land use and the transportation and capital facilities, the ones that we kind of did towards the end in May and June, where we had track changes in those versions, and then we've gone straight to a clean copy because it would have been hard to distribute a public review draft that had a bunch of track changes in it. It would have been very difficult to follow. There aren't, we incorporated. We received feedback on the goals and policies for land use, housing, transportation, and capital facilities from both the Planning Commission and City Council during the month of June. And we did incorporate those edits, some of the changes to the policy language. If there are specific policies in mind, I do have still track changes versions that then, of course, we accepted all the track changes and put out this public review draft. If there are any, of your previous feedback that you want to make sure have been incorporated, but we were pretty diligent in going back through, and I went back and listened to the meetings again on YouTube, to try to make sure that we captured the feedback from the Planning Commission and the City Council.
Thank you.
It's Commissioner Connor Davis, question about, we're adding density, we're adding like a larger population. What the city might be doing from the staffing side to address like public works, to address parks and recreation, to make sure that we're, repainting crosswalks like downtown here. What's being done internally to ensure that as we're hitting these growth targets, that we're also kind of meeting just like the basic needs of a growing city from a staffing perspective?
Take that one.
So that's definitely outside of this task, but that is, what the city council wrestles with, and they review that annually with every budget cycle, driven by the staff recommendations, the mayor's priorities to put forth appropriate staffing, whether it's for level of service that the council wants or an actual level of service. So again, that's handled out here through a budgeting process to make sure that we are growing smartly and appropriately.
I guess, and I do see it as a direct connection to what we're discussing here. I've spent the last year reaching out to the city about the downtown crosswalk and the absence of any stripes there. It's been going on for a year. I was told in March that it would be addressed in the spring. It's now into the middle of the summer. I just struggle with seeing how the city is able to just maintain, to keep up with just basic things like that. There's vehicles that have bashed out windows on 20th Street that have just been left there. So to make sure that from a staffing perspective that we can, this is all great, but to attract businesses into these redeveloped districts, to bring businesses in here, we need to make sure that we have that staffing component taken care of.
Yeah, I mean, generally the comprehensive plan would be limited in providing the policy foundation, to basically, I guess, express the city's desire to stay on top of these type of things. So we could develop policies, within capital facilities or public services, basically saying that the city, shall, basically make attempts to provide adequate staffing for an increasing population or something along those lines. So that's really where the comp plan would stop, would be providing that policy foundation, as opposed to trying to find solutions or develop solutions within the comp plan. So if there are areas, if that's something, I'm happy to look back through there. And if there's some language that can be massaged to at least provide that policy foundation, we're happy to try to incorporate that.
Actually, Bruce, I think in a previous meeting, we had talked about parking downtown
Mhm.
that, and I know that you were opposed to any kind of paid parking. Is that?
Well, actually, it's
it?
the opposite.
Okay, in favor of paid
Yeah,
parking, yes.
I am in favor of people who are not citizens of the city paying parking.
That's, okay, that's what it was, right.
Yeah,
Yeah,
because there's a lot of people from outside the city who use our parks.
that's right.
I'm totally fine with that. I just like them to contribute to.
And that was really on that note, this downtown redevelopment zone and you're trying to attract people to come in. There are, if you go out through past the arterial, roads here, there's just abandoned vehicles around downtown that would otherwise be, where maybe perhaps within the downtown core, we do add some kind of restricted parking time. And you have zones like that throughout the city. I don't know if we have any kind of, there's no really parking and right. But yeah, along the same lines of, trying to attract businesses in through these comprehensive plans, trying to, build in denser growth. To get rid of some of the blight and, start having some kind of parking enforcement.
I'll jump in if I may on just a couple things. And to Commissioner Dewar's point, I went back to my notes, which are always so cryptic, but to see whether or not some of the things that had been discussed in these past land use, housing, and the rezone are going to be, I would think, things that would get people into a room and to get people engaged. I'm concerned that we are going to have people that think that they've been blindsided, even though they've had all this opportunity. And so I did receive a phone call from someone in the community specifically about 20th. I urged that person to get a hold of you directly because I think that they've got some misinformation and to engage now. So it's starting maybe to make it out there, but once a notice falls in my neighbor's mailbox, and it's not that my neighbor won the lottery, to your point, I'm happy perhaps that they have, but if I'm the next door neighbor, that's where I have the angst over some of the things that have been done and will continue to be done, knowing that we don't have a whole lot of choice, that we're being held to something that is being forced upon us. So transportation, again, I would look at making the center of our city, the lake of our city, something that is locked down with speed. We've started to do that. I think it is working, but to continue to do that. And then every inlet and outlet from the lake, I think needs to be our highest priority. That, Machias, South Lake Stevens, that part that comes out right by Les Schwab, all of these places that you're in and out of the lake that are getting more and more congested, I think are going to need to have attention. I was disappointed that the consultants had missed South Lake Stevens and Machias. That had not made their radar when they were presenting a couple months ago. So with all the growth that's going on there, and if this 20th is developed now into more townhomes and apartments, you've got to get from one side of the lake to the other. And how are you going to do that if those are not monitored? So roundabout and or lighting, so that you're having people stop so people can walk, something that just softens that curve from South Lake Stevens or from Davies onto South Lake Stevens. And then the other thing that I had put in here that had to do with land use were, and I won't go into waterfront residential because you guys have all heard it before, but some of the tax exemptions and now with the ADU green light, may at that point between now and 2044 be revised, because I know that this is a fluid document, but I think that there's going to be some pullback. I hope that there's going to be some pullback out of Olympia on some of these things that they've put forth in some of these most recent 1220 and others, that the cities just can't sustain it. I just came over from the east side this morning. Cities can't sustain what they're asking them to do. So we happen to be compliant and good for on us, but they're going to have to do some adjustments along the way. And I would hope that this document, even though so much work has been put into it, remains fluid to a point where it can be the best thing for Lake Stevens, not the best thing that's compliant.
Yeah, and we still will have the opportunity to do our annual updates through the annual docket. So as things come down the pipeline or as conditions change, there still is the opportunity. It wouldn't be the level of effort of a periodic update, but if it's, if one year we really wanted to focus on updating the housing element to reflect existing conditions or account for any changes in policy direction at the state level or at the local level, that's something that we can continue to do in the upcoming years.
I've got a lot more comments.
Yeah.
Um, I really tried to go through the whole thing. I'm such a procrastinator. I only got away halfway through, but this is what I've got. In chapter 1, I was really looking for this goes through the process of how to make zoning changes and such. And a couple months ago, I mentioned this, that I read in the paper, oh, there's a big zoning change for this neighborhood south of the lake. And I'm like, wait a second, why didn't I know about that? And you mentioned that there's that particular rezone got bypassed straight to the city council. And I was looking in the document to see where is that process of bypassing the planning commission. And I didn't see it, except for maybe on page 1-20, which is page 34 of the packet, where it says alternative disposition. I'm wondering maybe that's what it is, or it says proposals not included in the annual comprehensive plan may at the city's discretion be considered as part of the department's ongoing work program. So maybe, it kind of bypasses the whole process and gets right up onto the docket. But
What page did you say that was?
that's 34 of 331. Where it says, it's the threshold review section, where it
Yeah.
goes through all the step-by-step process. This is what they have to do unless you don't want to do it. Then you can do D, which is the alternative disposition, which is kind of the loophole behind around the whole thing. I don't know if those two things that I mentioned, maybe they're completely different things, but first of all, in the future, if there's big zoning changes, I like at least to be notified. Like planning commission say, hey, this thing is being bypassed straight to the city council. We didn't hear about it at all.
So you're talking about like a project specific one that would have gone to the hearing examiner and then gone to the city council,
Yeah, I don't know.
as
I
opposed
would
to
think that
coming.
process would be in here, but I
Okay.
didn't see that in here.
There are two rezone processes.
Oh, okay.
One, if it's tied to a comprehensive plan change,
Mhm.
that goes to the planning commission, then to the city council. It's a legislative action.
Okay.
If it's a rezone from one single family zone to another, that is a project specific action that goes in front of the hearing examiner and the city council. So there are defined different processes in code.
Okay.
How those are,
And that's not defined or described in this document.
no, which it doesn't necessarily need to be.
Oh, okay.
We can make that distinction.
Oh, okay. All right. That's just my ignorance. I just didn't. All right. Well, I didn't know that process existed. All right. So I got a couple other little ticky-tack things. On page 26, it shows second to last paragraph, it says accommodate future urban capacities in the future.
Okay.
It just seemed awkward. And then on page 46, on 46, it says that where is it? It says that downtown Lake Stevens. Consists of the historic downtown, this is the third from the bottom paragraph. Historic town center adjacent to the northwestern tip of the lake. It's like northeastern tip of the lake, last I checked. Oh, and on page 82. 82. Bottom paragraph, it says, for 2020 to 2044, Lake Stevens was allocated an additional 4915 additional housing types. It should be units. That would be a crazy number of types of. And then page 90. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, this is, I appreciate you going through it. I mean, that's how we find these
I mean,
things.
I
So,
took the time to read this.
Yeah.
thing. I might as well give you all the.
oh, yeah. No, and if you don't, I mean, if you don't want to go through every single one, you're also welcome. If you have them written, you can send them to me as well.
Just a
But,
couple more.
Yeah.
So I'm almost at where I was, let me see, there's one part, oh yeah, bottom of the page, it says, housing affordability challenges are more pronounced for households of color. It repeats are more.
Okay.
Okay, page 115. There's no mention of mammals. I think I may have mentioned this before. We have birds, fish, and amphibians, reptiles, and insects, and other invertebrates. But we have mammals, we have otters, we have
Where pages?
coyotes.
Page 115 of the packet.
Sometimes we have bears come into town.
Solid one.
Where's he getting?
I did. I did my homework. Okay, yeah. Okay, that's all those. Let's see. Oh, and on page 98, it mentions some of the benefits or some of the efforts to make low-cost housing more available. And I like these where there's a streamlined approval processing, and then there's priority permit processing. In my opinion, I think streamlined approval processing should be a thing that everybody gets to enjoy. I would think that the processing, I know you've mentioned that you're improving the process, making it more modernized, less paperwork, more online type process. I think that's great. And I hope that that's available to everybody and not just the low cost homes. Now, when it comes to the low cost homes, priority permitting, I'm okay with those projects jumping to the front of the line. But I think as far as the whole process, that should be, everybody gets to enjoy a strong, more streamlined process. Other than that, and this is just a general comment, not related to the document. I don't know if this can be enabled by anything in the document. And I know this is a snobbish and selfish thing to ask. I'm so sorry, but there's two things that I would just love. And I don't know if this could be enabled. We need a restaurant on the lake and we need a gas station on the lake. And I don't know if that can be enabled by anything in the policies that can be done here. I know the city can't directly do that, but there's, things that you can do to encourage that. But boy, if I was an entrepreneurial type and I had lots of money, I would love to fund, something like that. So I'm sure it would be very popular.
Until it's built next to you.
Well, yeah, I mean.
That's, I will say, that's outside of this document, but its companion document, the Shoreline Master Program, does have language that specifically talks about the high intensity zones on the lake and has those variety of uses, which include some of those marina type uses that you're describing.
Yeah.
I would just note that you already have the last name to open a steakhouse, so.
I know that. Yeah. All right, that's all I've got. Sorry for the monologue.
Can I ask a question about ADUs?
Yes.
So I'll admit I have not done a bunch of research around ADUs, but there was a lot of conversation around short-term rentals a year or so ago. I can imagine that the ADU could have a similar conversation around it in terms of individuals might, not enjoying having, a bunch of, these ADUs near them or in the vicinity and that causing problems. We put a limit on the number of licenses we would offer for short-term dwelling units. Is there any restriction? I mean, the code says upwards of 4 ADUs per lot is what I thought I read.
Two ADUs per lot.
So, I mean, I guess, are there any curbs or restrictions that the city could put on that says, okay, this is getting out of hand, we need to slow this down? I'm not saying it's going to get there, but.
Yeah, so the House Bill 1337 the enabling legislation that required cities to update their code, it specifically said that cities could regulate short-term rentals. And so the short-term rental regulations, the vacation rental regulations that we have would apply to ADUs. So it's not like all of a sudden there's an unlimited cap of short-term rentals. As long as they're in ADUs, we are allowed to regulate them, and we do regulate them. So yeah, there would still be that limit on the number, that's assuming that people are complying with the code and not just doing it. And then we have code enforcement to deal with that situation if that becomes problematic. But yeah, we are able to still regulate short-term rentals within ADUs.
If your question was though, can we regulate the number of ADUs on residential properties? The answer is no. That is a state mandate that has superseded our local authority in this case.
And so in theory, every single lot in the city could put
2 accessory dwelling.
2 accessory dwelling units on their property, and the city can do nothing. That's
Unless
just,
prohibited
what the
by
code-
critical areas.
that's what the code says it is, and okay.
If they can meet the other development standards, setbacks,
It's not, there's not because it's not a business license. It is another dwelling unit. and It's
Correct.
processed the same way somebody would want to build a single family residence on their lot.
Correct.
yeah, it just requires a building permit.
And as Dave said, they still have to meet the dimensional standards. I mean, so
Sure.
there's the opportunity, the use is available to every lot, but can they actually physically accommodate it becomes another question.
Sure, but yeah, in the event that we had 5,000 of these pop up in the next 3 years, it is what it is, and we couldn't stop it. Not that we wanted to. I just
Yeah.
could see a scenario where it gets out of hand and
Yeah.
we get unintended consequences, and there's nothing we can do to slow it down.
I would just note, yeah, I mean, we've obviously the code has been in place for about 5 months now. We have, we've seen a lot more interest. We haven't seen like hundreds and hundreds of people pounding at our doors to do it. I would also note just especially from an impervious surface area side of things, that so many of our recent subdivisions were built out right to the maximum. So like when they want to do a deck in their backyard, they have a hard time doing it. So they're going to have a hard time squeezing in an ADU on a lot of these more recent lots. And we have thousands and thousands of housing units over the last decade. And so we have a lot that built right up to and didn't really leave a whole lot of flexibility as far as doing additional structures.
I remember reading in here somewhere, it says there's only been 6 that are currently.
Yeah, I think we tracking it, we haven't had a whole lot over the last few years. And yeah, we've started to see more. We have several in the queue right now. We have a lot of people when they come on for pre-application meetings are interested and are starting to incorporate it into site design. But yeah, I mean, it's also, people are starting, you can do duplex on pretty much any residential lot now. And so people are deciding, well, do I want to, try to max out the property and do a duplex? Is there a way for me to try to get a duplex and also an ADU? I mean, you start to run in to some of the limiting development standards pretty quickly when you're trying to max out your site and you need to, make choices.
Yeah, I'll just, for what it's worth, right? My parents live in San Diego County, and my mother said that the number of ADUs going on down there is increasing substantially, and there's value in that in terms of, one, the homeowner is able to, well, yeah, better afford their home, right? Because they bought this thing and it offsets some of their costs,
Yeah.
but then also, as it says, right, it's intended to allow lower cost options. I'm just curious if there are cities either in our state or around the country who have been doing this for a while, who are starting to see, negative unintended consequences. And yeah, I just haven't done the research, so it's hard to say. And I'm not saying we should speculate here. I'm just curious if there is any knowledge that we could use to hopefully get in front of that. I don't know how, but.
One real quick, I can tell you, I grew up in St. Petersburg, Florida, and every house in St. Pete had a garage apartment, had an ADU. And there was no, at least from my perspective, I mean, I lived in a couple of those garage apartments. There were no, like, couldn't see, I thought it was a pretty good tenant. But it was just that revenue opportunity for a homeowner. And I know when my wife and I went to look for a place, that was like the one thing that we knew we wanted, was to have that built-in ADU. Mother-in-law.
I can tell you that Seattle is struggling. And parking and the cost to construct there. And I mean, if you do the cost per square foot to build anything in Seattle right now, people won't even touch it. Contractors don't want to deal with it. It's overregulated. Nobody wants to be rung up on everything, and nobody's happy about it. So my personal opinion is, I hope that this is one of those that gets pulled back a little bit, because I think it was the right intention, but the wrong hammer on the nail, to keep going with the construction pun, I guess.
Can I make one kind of, I wanted to make more of put a pin in something that you said actually earlier about the kind of nature of what we're doing here with this the 10-year comp plan revision. Huge heavy lift. You guys did so much work. I really enjoyed, like Commissioner Dewar said, that we were able to take chunks at a time and work on it over the last year. This was really great work, and I personally am super happy with what I read. But I did want to just really hammer down what you said, which is, it seems scary to say we're going to do this for the next 10 years, but we actually can, as you mentioned, approach each element on the docket if something were to change legislatively, or if the city has different priorities. So I just want to say, in case anybody watches this video later, since I don't think anyone's watching it now, that we do have the flexibility and the fluidity that Commissioner Huxford was talking about to approach these topics inside of that 10-year period. And so I just wanted to really hammer down on that. I think that it feels very weighty when you're looking at a 10-year plan, but we do have the ability to approach the elements individually over the next 10 years as needed.
Yeah, and the scope of the scale of the annual docket, it needs to compete with other work priorities for the city and for the department. But if there's, specific direction, especially from city council on changes that they'd like to see, that just needs to be reflected in the long range planning work program for that year. And then but yeah, I mean, as all of you that have been on for the last few years, I mean, we've had annual dockets pretty much every year. There have been, last year focused on some land use map amendments, some other changes to the land use elements. We're always updating the capital facilities element. So we're always basically touching the comp plan on an annual basis. So it's really easy to add in an item as long as there is the capacity and the direction from city council to do so.
My kids love to tell me I state the obvious, but I'm hoping if anybody were to watch this and think about it later, then we say.
I'll encourage all my friends.
Yeah.
One quick thing is table 9.1 on page 321. The project description is missing for Great Road, page 321. And just a quick question: if these are slated projects for the next couple of decades, do we as a commission, can we get our hands on any type of estimation? What year these are built into the budget, just to have a general sense of we've gone over what the priorities are, but at what stage, what number of some of these projects may be accomplished.
Yeah, no, that's something that we can do. And just to clarify, and following up on the other Commissioner Davis's comments, tables 9.1 and 9.2 are two of the things that are updated pretty much every year. And, especially the 6-year plan is something that we have to update. And then just the process of moving things from the 20-year to the 6-year to the annual budget, you basically need to be updating both of them every year. And then, the dates change a little bit, but that 6-year table definitely needs to be updated every year. And so, and we still have a couple of, thanks for identifying some of the areas we need to still fill in some of those, and there's still a little bit of formatting to work on, but, yeah, no, those are all things that we would anticipate updating. And if there's a better way to present the information and to provide, information in a way that's easier for both the public and the commission to really process and understand what it's saying and how we can report back on that. Yeah, we're happy to look into ways to do that.
The information is fantastic. It's for me, it's a lot easier to wrap my head around this when, say within that 6-year plan, this is, spring of 2025. And that might be too much of a burden when it comes to, like, you put that out there, and then if it's summer of 2025 and you have people knocking on the door, which I totally understand, even if it was a range of years, 2025, 2026.
Yeah, and that level of detail is usually going to more be within the budget. And like once things, they work their way from the 20-year to the 6-year, and then they get prioritized and they get funded in the annual budget. And then that was one of the graphics I think that Transpo had tried to explain, kind of how you basically the ladder to get things actually built.
I think that's what we could try to do, is bring you a flavor of what gets on the annual budget to move forward, because that's usually a 2-part process. Sometimes a project that is slated to start in 2024 because of a myriad of reasons isn't going to make that construction date. So often they get kicked out. The Bayview Trail, that started in the south part of the city is a great example. The mayor, when he was elected, that was his first priority, and a great priority, but it was also good to show the learning process of a project where, okay, we got to go to preliminary design and we got to start on property acquisition, legal, through all these phases of the project to final design, and then funding it, 5 years later, and we're going to break ground. So it's hard to predict the life cycle of any capital project due to a lot of factors. So, but we can do our best to try to bring you forward what that list looks like.
Right.
If Don or Dave remember to do that.
Appreciate it. Is there anybody online for any public comments? Anything else, Commissioner Morton?
Well, I was gonna leave this for individual comment, but I'll say it now because it's on here, actually. These last like 10 or so pages are like some of the most interesting pages on the whole thing. It's fun to go through that wish list and think about what could be done. On page 324, the surface water projects, I just wanted to inform everyone else. I attended the city council meeting a couple months ago, and the surface water person, and I don't remember her name, I'm sorry, she presented the 4 options for the weir replacement right over here. I'll make sure. And the plan had always, that I had thought was always going to be to have an adjustable weir where they'd be able to keep the lake at a specific level all year long. That ain't gonna happen, according to the presentation, because what we're doing here is illegal. It's if we were to start to do it today, we would not be allowed to do that. what we're doing right now with keeping the level, having those boards there.
Right.
But we're kind of grandfathered in. And so the other options are to have a fixed weir, do nothing, or just let the lake flow out. Whatever it is. A fixed berm is, it looks like the favored proposal. I have a problem with that. I don't have time to really go into it, but I encourage you all to look at that presentation, because it's really interesting, because it'll determine like the level of the lake, in the future. So, yeah.
And for topics like that, I mean, obviously it should be, associated with your work plan, but like Shannon Farrant, who's the service water manager, is very knowledgeable and
Yeah.
I'm sure if there was a specific focus or if there was interest from the planning commission, that's something that we could look just from like an educational perspective and trying to find a connection with some of the work that you're doing.
Yeah, and then at the bottom of this list, the original outlet channel restoration. That's blows your mind, because that would like bring the water back going around here,
Right.
like what it was 150 years ago. But I doubt that's going to happen. But all right, yeah, I'm done.
There aren't any other comments. We'll go to commissioners' reports. Commissioner Davis, Jennifer Davis,
I have nothing tonight.
Commissioner Morton.
Nope.
Commissioner Dewar
Nothing tonight.
and Mr. Packard.
Just that I will be out of town for that September 18th meeting. So I guess what input, is it just if I have input, provide it via email? Is there a specific vote that's going to happen that I can provide my input for? What will the action be on that date?
Yeah, I mean, the action is if we're able to get through it in the one meeting would be, taking action on making a recommendation to city council on adoption of the plan with any recommended revisions by the planning commission. Which, if you weren't there either in person or virtually, you wouldn't be able to do. I mean, you could provide your comments in advance and ask that they kind of be either read into the record or just entered into the record, or just make sure that, especially if you have proposed changes, that's something that we can introduce those and see how the other commissioners feel about them.
Okay.
So likely what you'll see at the next meeting, obviously, we'll take the input from tonight and, make any of those corrections. We're going to do a stopover with the city council early September, get any feedback, do their refinement, and then how we respond to the public and agency comments. We'll pretty much have a catalog and introduce those into the record. So that's really what you're going to see, but minimal text changes. And the text changes you see, at least in the next version of the draft, probably will be strike through again, so you can recognize those changes. But whatever, at the time we get to the final city council hearing, it would be a clean ordinance again.
Thank you.
Commissioner Huckster.
Just briefly, Jennifer and I had the opportunity to meet with Mayor Gailey and Brian and Linda Holt. Linda has announced her resignation from the commission. She regrets having to do so. She has enjoyed her time here and wanted us to convey that. And I wanted to, as a commissioner that has served with her a long time, let her know publicly how much I appreciated and learned from her over the years that she has served on this committee. I also brought along something tonight. If anybody wants to sign it, I'll make sure that the two of them receive that, but wanted to publicly acknowledge her service and the service of her family on behalf of the community.
Can I just add to that? I would just echo what you said. Linda is probably possibly the longest serving planning commissioner in the history of Lake Stevens. And I was lucky enough to serve alongside her and learn from her and really appreciate how dedicated to our community. She's been so much valuable insight, so many hours on behalf of the city. And I feel that her legacy of all the hard work that she put in will just continue to go on as our city grows. So it was really an honor to serve alongside her. And I just am happy to be able to say that publicly.
And I don't have anything. Turn it over to Planning Director.
Yeah, I don't really have any comments for the group tonight, so.
Right. Well, with that, we have a motion to adjourn.
A motion to adjourn.
Second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, thank you very much. That is an adjournment of our August 19th